The chains went taut before her knees hit the stone. That was the sound the whole hall remembered after. Not her name, not the charge, but the dry rattle of iron, pulling straight, and the small, human thud of a woman's knees, finding rock. Sigrid did not cry out. She had decided that on the stairs, somewhere between the dungeon door and the light, that she would not give them the sound they wanted. Her wrists were rubbed pink above the manacles. A guard's gauntlet had left 4 bruises in a neat row on her upper arm, already purpling, already shaped like someone else's fingers. She did not look at the bruises. She looked at the floor, because the floor was safer than the 500 faces above her, and because if she lifted her chin even an inch too soon, she thought she might shatter before the verdict ever came. Someone in the gallery laughed, not cruelly, just the laugh of a person relieved it isn't them. The treaty itself sat on a velvet cushion not 6 feet from her, sealed wax cracked open like a wound. The Alpha King's own sigil, the wolf and crown, pressed 1,000 times into 1,000 documents by her own steady hand, for 6 years, staring up at the rafters as if it, too, were waiting to see what would happen to her. She was 26 years old. She had a faint white scar along her left collarbone, shaped like a fishhook, from a fall off the scribery stairs the week she'd first sworn her oath of service, the week she'd first seen him. And she had forged nothing. The herald's staff struck the floor 3 times, and the sound went through her teeth. "Sigrid of the Western Scribery," he called, voice pitched to carry to the back wall. "Clerk to the Crown stands accused of forging the royal seal upon the Treaty of Stonemere, in betrayal of the Alpha King and the pacts under his protection." Betrayal. The word landed somewhere under her ribs and stayed there. She had spent 6 years copying his letters in a hand so close to his own sealmaster's that other clerks asked her to teach them the trick of it. She had spent 6 years memorizing the particular impatience of his footstep in the outer hall, the half-second pause he always took before opening a door, as if bracing for what waited on the other side. She had loved him the way a woman loves a king she has never once been alone with, from across rooms, in silences, in the careful distance built into every floor plan, of every castle in every kingdom that has ever feared its own wolves. And now the whole realm had gathered to watch him decide whether to have her killed for it. "Rise," the herald said. She did not rise. Her knees would not do it. A guard's hand closed around her upper arm, not ungently, which she noticed even then, even through the fear, the way you notice a single kind thing in a burning building, and hauled her up by the chain between her wrists until she stood swaying in front of the dais. The hall held its breath, the way a held breath sounds. Wrong. Too even. 500 people breathing in the same shallow rhythm, waiting. She kept her eyes on the 3rd stair of the dais. She had counted the stairs once, months ago, waiting outside this chamber with a tray of correspondence, not knowing why she'd counted them, only that her mind did that, counted things, fixed on edges and numbers when the rest of her wanted to run. 12 stairs. She was looking at the 3rd, Sigrid of the Western Scribery. A different voice now, older, drier, used to being obeyed. Chief Advisor Corwin. He had a single streak of pure white through his dark beard, just left of his chin, that he was always touching when he thought no one watched him do it. He was touching it now. "The seal in question bears your hand. 3 scribes have confirmed the slant of the lettering. The wax shows a thumbprint consistent with—" "I never touched that treaty," Sigrid said. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. It surprised her enough that for one heartbeat she almost looked up to see if it had surprised anyone else. Corwin's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. "She speaks. She is permitted to speak," said the voice from the throne. And there it was. The voice she had built 6 years of foolish, private hope around, low and even, and worn at the edges like a blade that had cut through too many difficult mornings. Lazar, King Lazar of the Northern Wolves, Alpha to 9 packs, the man whose seal she had never once forged and whose face she had not yet allowed herself to see. She kept looking at the third stair. Sigrid. He said her name like he was testing the weight of it, the way he tested the weight of a treaty before he signed it. Look at me. The hall rustled. This was not how it was done. The condemned did not get addressed gently, did not get invited to lift their eyes, and several lords in the gallery exchanged glances sharp enough to draw blood. She heard the rustle. She heard, underneath it, her own pulse, loud as a second heartbeat. She thought, if I look at him and he has already decided, I will know it instantly, and I will have to stand here and watch him say it anyway, she thought. If I don't look at him, I will never know if there was a single moment, even one, where he wasn't sure. Her chin came up. The chains rang faintly with the movement, a small bright sound in all that silence. And 500 people watched a chained woman lift her face to her king. And what passed between Sigrid and Lazar in the half-second, their eyes finally met, was not mercy. And it was not judgment. It was recognition, sharp enough to draw blood of its own. His jaw had gone tight before she even finished raising her head. She would learn, much later, that he had been holding himself rigid since the guards dragged her in, that his hands on the carved arms of the throne had gone white at the knuckle the moment the chains first rattled, that some animal part of him had been straining toward the sound of her voice since she'd said, "I never touched that treaty," in a tone too plain, too unfrightened, too much like a woman telling the truth. Their gazes locked, and the king of 9 packs, a man who had signed 3 death warrants that very season without his pulse changing, felt his own breath catch audibly enough that the advisor beside him heard it. Sigrid did not look away first. She did not have the strength left to manage it, and so instead, by accident, she won something she hadn't known was a contest. She held. "Bring the wax sample forward," Lazar said, and his voice had changed by 1 degree, a single degree, the kind of shift only someone who had spent 6 years cataloging his footsteps would ever catch. "I want to see it myself." Corwin's hand found his beard again. "Your Majesty, the scribes have already." "I heard what the scribes said." Lazar rose. The throne creaked once under the absence of his weight, an old specific sound, and Sigrid felt that sound land in her chest like a second pulse. "I would like to see it myself." He came down the 12 stairs. She had counted them so many times waiting in hallways with trays of letters, never once imagining she would watch him descend them toward her in chains. And some absurd, devastated part of her mind noted, he takes them 2 at a time when he's not performing for a room, and he is not doing that now. He is taking them 1 at a time, slow like a man walking toward something he isn't ready to confirm. He stopped 4 feet from her, close enough that she could see the threading of silver just beginning at his temple, the kind that comes early to men who don't sleep enough. Close to smell, and this she had not expected, had never once been close enough to learn, that he smelled of cedar, and the particular, cold mineral scent of mountain air, the kind that clings to a man who has spent his life pacing battlements rather than sitting in halls. "You forged nothing," he said. "Not a question." "No," she said. "Your Majesty." "Then why?" And here his voice dropped, pitched only for her, though half the hall strained to catch it anyway. "Does the wax carry your mark?" "I don't know." Her voice cracked on the second word. She hated that it cracked. "I have copied 1,000 of your letters. I know my own hand from a forger's. That seal is not mine." Something flickered behind his eyes. Not doubt of her. Exactly, but the specific old exhaustion of a man who has been lied to so many times, by people standing exactly where she now stood, in exactly that posture, with exactly that tremor of righteous protest. She watched him fight that exhaustion. She watched him lose the fight for 1/2 second and find, underneath it, something else entirely. Something that looked almost like relief at being given a reason to keep looking at her. "Take her to the lower chamber," Lazar said at last, straightening, and the words landed in the hall like a verdict reversed mid-breath. "Not the dungeon, the lower chamber." I will examine the seal myself before this trial resumes. The hall erupted into the low roar of 500 people disagreeing with each other in whispers. Corwin's face did something complicated and brief. Alarm, swiftly buried, so swiftly that only a woman trained for 6 years to read the smallest shift of expression on a powerful man's face would have caught it at all. Sigrid caught it. She didn't yet know what it meant. She only knew, as the guards turned her by the chain and walked her from the hall, that she had looked up expecting an executioner and found, instead, a king who had stopped at the third stair from the bottom, close enough to touch, far enough to be safe, and looked at her like she was the only true thing in the room. The lower chamber was warmer than the dungeon, and that alone nearly broke something in her. There was a fire. A small one, banked low, but a fire, and a chair instead of a stone bench, and someone had thought to leave a cup of water within reach of her chained hands. She drank it before she let herself wonder who had ordered it. The water tasted faintly of iron, like the inside of her own mouth, after she'd bitten her lip too hard on the dacis, trying not to cry. She heard him before she saw him, that half-second hesitation outside the door, the one she'd catalogued for years without ever knowing why she bothered. The king bracing himself before he opened a door he wasn't certain he wanted to walk through. "Leave us," Lazar told the guards. "Your Majesty, she's accused of. I am aware of what she's accused of. Leave us." The door shut. The fire popped once, a small wet sound, green wood somewhere in the stack. He didn't sit. He stood across the small room with his arms crossed, studying her the way she imagined he studied border disputes. For the seam, the place where the story didn't quite hold. 6 years, he said. You've worked in my scribery 6 years, and I have spoken to you, by my count, 4 times. 5, Sigrid said before she could stop herself. One of his eyebrows lifted, fractional. 5. The first time you asked where's the Ardenfell correspondence had gone. The second time you said good morning to the wrong clerk and I didn't correct you because I didn't want you to feel foolish. The third, she stopped herself. Her face went hot. It doesn't matter. It matters to me, he said, and something in the low, deliberate way he said it made the chains at her wrists feel suddenly very loud in the quiet room. Tell me the third time. She didn't. She looked at the fire instead, because if she told him the third time, that she had stayed late once, alone, copying treaty drafts by candlelight, and he had come in for a forgotten letter and stood in the doorway a moment too long before saying only, "Don't strain your eyes, clerk," in a voice rough with something she'd never let herself name. She thought she might actually cry, here, chained, in front of the one man in the realm she had spent 6 years refusing to want. Sigrid. Her name again, in that low, testing way. Look at me. She had already learned, in the space of one trial, that this was the most dangerous thing he could ask of her, and the thing she was, apparently, incapable of refusing. She looked at him. I don't believe you forged that seal, he said. I want you to understand that before anything else happens in this room. I don't believe it. Relief went through her so fast and so total that her knees actually buckled, 1/2 inch, enough that the chain rattled, and he took one involuntary step toward her before catching himself, hand half raised, stopping the motion before it became a touch. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then why, she said, when she trusted her voice again, am I still in chains? His jaw worked. Because the realm needs to believe I am fair before they will believe you are innocent. If I free you in this room, tonight, without proof, every lord in that hall will say the king freed his clerk because he wanted her, not because she was wronged. The word wanted sat between them like a coal someone had set carefully on the floor and was waiting to see who would step on first. And did you? Sigrid said, very quietly. Want me? Before tonight. It was the most reckless thing she had ever said to anyone in her life, and she said it chained, accused, exhausted past the point of caring what it cost her, and Lazar. Alpha King of 9 packs. A man who had not given an honest answer to a personal question in 11 years of rule, looked at her for 3 full seconds and then said, roughly, "You ask that now. I may not get another chance to." Something crossed his face that she would spend the rest of the trial trying to name. Not quite a smile. Closer to pain, the specific kind that comes from finally saying a true thing out loud after years of not saying it. "Yes," he said. "I wanted you. I have wanted you since the candlelight, and I have done 6 years of nothing about it, because a king does not bond himself to a clerk over a desk of correspondence, and because—" He stopped. "Because what?" "Because I am not free to simply want," he said, and the words came out clipped, almost angry, though she understood. She would understand later. Far too late to save either of them the pain of it, that the anger wasn't aimed at her at all. There are matters bound to this crown that are not mine to undo. It was the first lie he told her, by omission, and she felt the shape of it without understanding it the way you feel a stone under thin ice before it cracks. "You're not free," she repeated. "Not entirely. Not yet." "And the treaty I'm accused of forging," she said slowly, watching him the way she'd learned to watch closed doors and careful footsteps. "What does it actually say, Your Majesty?" "No one has told me. I copied the original draft myself months ago. I know every line of it. But the seal on that document tonight, what binds it?" He didn't answer immediately, and his hesitation answered for him. "It binds 2 packs into alliance," he said finally. "Mine and the Eastward Wolves. It carries terms regarding succession and regarding—" He stopped again. "Regarding what?" "Marriage," he said. "A binding marriage clause. Mine." The room went very cold very fast, colder than the dungeon had been, colder than chains. "You're betrothed," Sigrid said. "I am bound by a clause I did not write, to a woman I have met exactly twice in a treaty I did sign, the true one, weeks ago, with my own hand and my own seal." His voice had gone flat, controlled. The voice of a man reciting a wound rather than feeling it. "The document on that cushion tonight is not that treaty. The wording is different. The terms are different. Someone altered it after I signed and is trying to make it look as though the alteration came from my own scribery." "Why?" Sigrid breathed. "Would anyone forge a treaty to bind you tighter to a marriage you already signed for?" And Lazar looked at her, and for the first time since the chains had rattled in that hall, she watched something close behind his eyes, not toward her, but toward the door, toward the hall above them, toward a name he wasn't yet ready to say. "That," he said, "is what I intend to find out before I let anyone in that hall decide your fate." They brought her back up before dawn. Not to the chamber, to a smaller room first, gray stone, one high window letting in a wedge of cold light, and it was there, waiting for the guards to fetch her again, that she finally let herself shake. Hands first, then her shoulders. The chains made a small, helpless music against the strain of it, and she pressed her wrists hard against her stomach, willing herself still. Because, if Corwin walked past that door and saw her falling apart, she would hand him exactly the image he wanted, a guilty woman undone by guilt. She did not yet know to fear Corwin specifically. She only knew, the way the body knows a held breath before the mind names the danger, that his eyes had found her too often in that hall, calculating, while everyone else's had only stared. A girl no older than 15 brought her bread and a clean cloth for her face. The girl had a small burn scar across 2 knuckles of her right hand, the kind kitchen work leaves on the careless and the very young. "They say the king went pale," the girl whispered, setting the bread down too close to be casual. "When you looked up, my aunt was serving wine in the gallery." She said his hand shook on the cup. "Don't," Sigrid said softly. "Don't repeat that. Not to anyone." The girl's face fell, chastened, and Sigrid felt a small, sharp guilt for it. The girl had only meant to be kind, had only meant to hand a frightened woman a piece of hope, and Sigrid had handed her caution instead. It was, she thought later, the first disappointing thing she did in the whole long night. She had been so afraid of being watched that she'd forgotten, for one moment, to be gentle with someone smaller and more frightened than herself. "I'm sorry," Sigrid said. "Thank you for the bread." The girl nodded, quick, and was gone, before Sigrid could say anything else. She ate 2 bites. Her throat wouldn't take more. When the guards came for her again, the corridor smelled different than it had the night before. Wood smoke, and under it, faint, the mineral tang of rain that hadn't yet fallen. The kind of smell that meant a storm was building somewhere past the mountains and hadn't broken yet. She would remember that smell for the rest of her life, tangled up with the sound the great hall doors made when they opened, a low groan of old hinges, like the whole castle bracing itself. The hall was fuller than the night before. Word had traveled. 500 had become, she guessed, near 1,000, packed shoulder to shoulder along the galleries, drawn by rumor of a king who'd hesitated, who'd taken the accused below instead of condemning her outright. She was not dragged this time. The guards walked her, chains still binding her wrists, but slack enough, now that she could keep her own balance, and she understood, distantly, that this too was a message. The king had ordered her treated differently, and 1,000 watching eyes had noticed. Lazar was already seated when she entered. Corwin stood at his right hand, as always, beard streak catching the torchlight, face arranged into careful patience. But she saw it now, having been warned, having spent a long gray dawn turning the question over. She saw the way his eyes tracked her across the floor with something sharper than the others wore. Not curiosity, calculation. "Bring the wax," Lazar said, and his voice carried the particular flatness of a man who has already decided what he's looking for. A scribe brought the treaty forward on its cushion. Lazar took it himself this time, turning it in the light, running his thumb along the broken seal with a care that made the whole hall fall silent to watch him do it. "This seal," he said slowly, "was pressed with my ring. There is no question of that. The wolf, the crown, exact." He looked up. "The question is when." Murmurs. Corwin's hand found his beard. "Chief advisor," Lazar said, without looking at him, "you confirmed 3 scribes matched the lettering to the accused hand." "I did, Your Majesty." "Bring them forward. I want to hear it from each, not relayed through you." A small, almost imperceptible stillness crossed Corwin's face, there and gone, like a cloud shadow racing over a field. But Sigrid caught it, because she had spent the whole gray dawn learning to look for exactly that. The 3 scribes were brought. Sigrid recognized all of them. Mira, who had a small ink-stained birthmark on her left ear that the other clerks teased her about gently. Old Pell, whose hands shook now with age so badly he could barely hold a pen, and who had trained Sigrid herself when she first came to the scribery at 19. And Henrik, young, ambitious, eager in a way that made her uneasy even now, eager in a way that made her wonder, with a cold drop in her stomach, who had told him what to say. "Pell," Lazar said. "You first. You trained her. You know her hand best of anyone alive. Look at that seal's accompanying text again. Tell me plainly, is that her lettering, or a forger's copy of it?" Old Pell stepped forward, hands trembling, and took the document with the reverence of a man who had spent 60 years loving the shape of letters more than almost anything else in his life. He studied it a long moment. The hall held its strange, shallow breath again. "The slant is hers," Pell said slowly. "The pressure of the downstrokes is hers. But," he frowned, turned the parchment toward the window light. "The serif on the capital letters. She doesn't do that. She never did that. Not once, in 6 years of training under me. Someone good enough to copy 90 parts of her hand in 100. But not someone who spent 6 years standing over her shoulder." The hall's silence changed quality, sharpened, leaned forward. "You're certain?" Lazar said. "Your Majesty, I taught that girl her letters when she was 19, and grieving her father and barely eating. I know her hand the way I know my own. That capital is wrong." Sigrid felt something crack open in her chest, something she had been holding rigid since the chains first closed around her wrists. She didn't cry. She had promised herself she wouldn't, and some stubborn, exhausted part of her was still keeping that promise even now, but her eyes burned, and she had to look hard at the floor for a moment to keep the promise intact. Then the document is a forgery, Lazar said, skillful, but a forgery. He set it down, which means someone in this castle is skilled enough to copy a royal clerk's hand to 90 parts in 100, with access enough to my own ring to press an exact seal, and motive enough to risk a forgery this audacious. His eyes lifted, slow, deliberate, and found Corwin's. Chief advisor, Lazar said, who, besides myself, has handled my seal ring in the last month. The question landed in the hall like a dropped blade. Corwin's face did not change. That was the first thing Sigrid noticed. The careful, practiced stillness of it. The stillness of a man who has rehearsed for exactly this moment, and still, somehow, cannot quite control the small muscle that jumps once beneath his left eye. Only your manservant, your majesty, and myself, in matters of state requiring. You have handled it. As is my duty, your majesty, in your absence when correspondence required. I did not ask for your duty. I asked if you handled it. A long pause. The fire smell of torches, the particular held stillness of 1,000 people who sense all at once that the story they came to watch has changed shape beneath them. Yes, Corwin said. I handled it. And the night this treaty was altered, Lazar said, voice dropping lower, more dangerous for its quiet. Where were you? Your Majesty, I object to the implication. I have not yet made an implication. I have asked a question. Sigrid, chained, exhausted, aching in every joint from a night spent bracing against fear, found herself watching not Lazar now, but Corwin. Watching the small tremor start in his jaw, watching him reach, almost helplessly, for the white streak in his beard and touch it. Twice, 3 times, a man soothing himself the way another man might wring his hands. And then, into that taut silence, Corwin did something none of them expected. He laughed, not loudly. A short, dry, exhausted sound, the laugh of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just felt his arms give out. You want to know why? Corwin said, and his voice had changed entirely. Gone was the careful courtier's cadence, replaced by something rawer, older, tireder. Fine. I'll tell you why, your majesty, since we're finally being honest in this hall. I have served your father, and you, for 31 years. I held this kingdom together through 2 wars and a famine while you were still learning to hold a sword. And I watched you, 3 months ago, stand in your own chambers and tell your houndmaster that you would rather abdicate than marry a woman bonded to you by a treaty clause and not by your own heart. The hall's silence turned to something closer to a held scream. You said, Corwin went on, voice shaking now, not with fear but with something closer to grief, that you'd rather burn 9 packs, worth of alliance to ash, than marry, without choosing it yourself. Do you understand what that confession would have done to this kingdom if it reached the eastward wolves before the marriage clause was sealed? Do you understand how many lives depend on that alliance holding? Lazar had gone very still. So you altered the treaty. I tightened it, Corwin said. I made the marriage clause irreversible before your own restless heart could undo 31 years of work in a single fit of romantic foolishness. And when I needed a scapegoat in case the alteration was ever discovered, I chose. His eyes finally slid to Sigrid, and something in them, for one unbearable second, looked almost like an apology. I chose the one clerk in this castle whose hand was good enough to mimic, and whose face you couldn't stop finding, your majesty, because I knew that the moment you suspected forgery, you would tear this hall apart looking for the truth rather than let her hang for it. I needed you distracted. I needed you afraid for her instead of furious at me. I needed time. Time for what? Lazar said, very quietly. To finish the binding before you could break it, Corwin said. I am not sorry for the kingdom, your majesty. I am sorry. And his voice cracked, fully, finally. The first crack in 31 years of careful composure, for her. She did nothing. She has only ever been in the wrong place, loved by the wrong man at the worst possible time. The hall did not breathe. Sigrid did not breathe. And Lazar, Alpha King, 9 packs, a man who had just watched his most trusted advisor confess to framing an innocent woman in order to trap him in a marriage he did not want, turned, slowly, and looked at Sigrid with an expression that held no triumph at all. Only the bare, unguarded look of a man finally caught, by his own court, in the act of wanting something he'd spent years pretending he could live without. The hall did not stay quiet for long. It broke into noise the way ice breaks on a spring river. All at once, in jagged pieces, 1,000 voices arguing over each other. Lords shouting for the guards to seize Corwin, others shouting that a man who'd served 31 years deserved a fair hearing of his own. The gallery a churning, furious sea, and Sigrid stood in the middle of it in chains that no longer made any sense on her wrists and felt absurdly invisible. Silence, Lazar said. It did not work the first time. He said it again, louder, and the wolf under the word showed itself. Not a shout, but something with teeth in it, a register that made the hair lift on every arm, in that hall, human and shifter alike, and this time the noise died like a snapped string. Corwin, Lazar said, you will be held under guard until the realm's council can determine the full weight of your crime. 31 years of service will be weighed. So will this. His voice did not rise. It didn't need to. You forged my seal. You altered a binding treaty between 2 packs without my knowledge or consent. And you let an innocent woman stand in chains before this entire court rather than confess it yourself a single hour earlier than you did. I did it for the kingdom, Corwin said, and for the first time his voice held no defiance at all, only a terrible, tired honesty. I would do it again. I believe you, Lazar said. That is what frightens me most about you. 2 guards moved to flank Corwin. He did not resist. He only looked once more at Sigrid and said, quietly enough that only the front rows caught it, I am sorry. For whatever that is worth to you now. It was worth something, not enough. But something. She found she could hold both truths at once, the anger and the strange, unwilling pity, the way she'd learned that night to hold fear and hope in the same chest without either one canceling the other out. She didn't answer him. She let him be led away in silence, and the hall watched a man who had run half the kingdom's correspondence for 3 decades walk out of it in chains meant for someone else. And no one in that hall, Sigrid included, felt anything as simple as satisfaction. Then it was only her, standing alone on the floor, the broken seal still sitting on its velvet cushion like evidence of a wound, and Lazar descending the 12 stairs again. 2 at a time now, she noticed, the performance gone, the careful king replaced by a man simply walking toward the thing he wanted. He stopped in front of her, closer than before. Close enough that the 1,000 watching eyes became, for one suspended moment, entirely irrelevant to both of them. Release her, Lazar said, and a guard's key found the manacles, and the chains fell away from her wrists with a clatter that rang through the whole silent hall like a bell. Sigrid stood there, wrists bare, raw, marked with 6 hours of iron, and did not know what to do with her own hands now that they were free. Lazar looked at them too. At the marks, something moved across his face. Not quite guilt, not quite grief. Something closer to the specific ache of a man realizing exactly how close he had come to losing something he'd never let himself claim. I should have looked harder before the trial began, he said, low, only for her. I had doubts, the moment they brought you in chained. I let the hall's expectations slow me down for half a day, before I trusted my own instinct over Corwin's evidence. That cost you a night in a cell and a morning in chains you didn't deserve. It was, she understood, the second disappointing thing in this story. Not Corwin's cruelty, which had always been cruelty's nature, but this. That the king who claimed to know her hand from 1,000 letters had still hesitated, had still let protocol, and a court's hunger for spectacle delay him, even for half a day, even while believing her. You came down 12 stairs at a time you didn't have to, Sigrid said. Most kings wouldn't have come down at all. Most kings, Lazar said, have not spent 6 years learning a clerk's hand well enough to recognize her absence in a forged document before his own chief advisor confessed to the forgery. A small, startled sound escaped her. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, something caught between the two. The marriage clause, she said. Is it still binding? His jaw tightened. The treaty itself, the true one, the one I signed weeks ago, still stands. The alliance with the eastward wolves holds. I will not undo 31 years of peace over my own heart, however much that heart. He stopped. However much your heart what? Wants something it has wanted for longer than it should admit, he said, and the words came out rough, unguarded, the most honest thing he'd said all night. The clause requires marriage to seal the alliance. It does not require that marriage to be loveless. It does not require it to be without choice on her part. His eyes held hers, steady, the same steadiness she'd first met across that hall when she lifted her chin from the stone floor. The eastward air released me from any binding obligation to her, specifically. An hour before this trial resumed, I sent word the moment Corwin's forgery became evident, asking that the marriage clause be fulfilled by whichever match the crown deemed wisest. So long as the alliance held, she agreed. Eagerly, in fact. She has wanted nothing to do with this match since it was first proposed. Sigrid's breath caught. You're saying, she said slowly, that the clause can be fulfilled by anyone you choose, as long as the alliance is honored. I'm saying, Lazar said, that I spent the worst night of my reign believing I might watch you executed for a crime you didn't commit. And somewhere in the middle of that night I stopped caring what the realm would say about a king who chose his clerk over a political match and started caring only about whether you would ever look at me again, the way you looked at me when they dragged you into that hall. The whole vast hall had gone utterly silent. 1,000 witnesses to a king laying himself open in front of the same court that had nearly condemned the woman standing in front of him. I am not, Sigrid said, voice shaking now. Finally, after a night and a morning of refusing to shake, a political match. I have no pack, no title, no land. I am a clerk with ink-stained fingers and a scar from falling down a staircase the week I first saw you. I am aware, Lazar said, of exactly what you are. I have spent 6 years cataloging it. A fishhook scar on your collarbone. A habit of counting stairs when you're frightened. A hand steady enough to forge nothing and honest enough to tell a king to his face that she doesn't know why his ring landed in someone else's crime. His voice dropped lower. I do not want a political match, Sigrid. I have one, signed and sealed, sitting on a cushion 6 feet from where you're standing. I want the woman who looked up at me from the floor of this hall like she expected to die and decided to tell the truth anyway. She did not answer in words. She closed the 6 feet between them instead. The first time in 6 years she had ever closed a distance toward him rather than waiting, breath held, for him to close it toward her, and stopped close enough to feel the warmth radiating off him. Close enough to smell cedar and cold mountain air again, closer than chains or rank or 6 years of careful, foolish distance had ever allowed. His hand came up, not to claim her. To ask, fingers hovering an inch from her jaw, waiting, the way he had waited on the stairs of that dais, the way he had waited 6 years in hallways and doorways and candlelit rooms. She turned her face into his palm and answered this question without a single word. The hall, 1,000 strong, did not make a sound. She did not become a queen that day. She became, first, something far stranger and far better to her. A woman believed. The council took 3 weeks to settle Corwin's fate. He was not executed. Lazar would not allow it, and Sigrid, when asked, found she would not have wanted it either. 31 years of genuine service did not erase a single night of cruelty. But it complicated the shape of the punishment enough that exile, not death, was what the realm finally settled on. Corwin left through the eastern gate on a gray morning, on foot, carrying one trunk and the white streak in his beard and nothing else of the power he'd held for 3 decades. And Sigrid watched him go from a high window and felt, to her own surprise, almost nothing at all. The fury had burned itself out somewhere in that long night of chains. What was left was only the quiet, unglamorous business of moving forward. She kept her post in the scribery for a month after the trial, out of stubbornness more than necessity, copying correspondence with hands no longer shaking, while half the castle whispered about when the king would formalize what everyone had watched happen on that hall floor. She let them whisper. She had spent 6 years being looked past. She found she did not mind, now. Being looked at, not so long as the looking came from people who had also watched her hold. A king's gaze from the floor of a trial meant to end her. Lazar did not rush her. That, more than anything, was what finally undid the last of her caution, that a king who could have simply declared her his and ended all debate chose instead to court her properly, slowly, the way he had apparently wanted to for 6 years and never once allowed himself. He brought her correspondence himself sometimes late, an excuse worn thin from overuse, and stood in doorways a half-second, too long before stepping through them, and once, only once, in the same room where 6 years before he had told a tired clerk not to strain her eyes. He set down a stack of letters he didn't need to deliver and said, quietly, "I am done waiting for the realm's permission to want you," and kissed her like a man finally collecting on a debt owed to his own heart. The wedding, when it came, was not the grand political spectacle the original forged clause had demanded. It was smaller. The Eastward Alliance was honored in its own separate ceremony, dry and diplomatic, and entirely without her, exactly as it should have been, a treaty fulfilled on its own terms, not stitched to her body as payment. Her wedding, the one that mattered, was attended by perhaps 200 people instead of 1,000, and old Pell stood near the front with his trembling hands folded, and the kitchen girl with the burn-scared knuckles was there too, given a seat near the front at Sigrid's own insistence, because some debts of kindness deserve repaying in daylight, not whispered apology. There is one image, though, that the people of that kingdom still tell. Long after the treaty and the trial, and even the marriage itself, have faded into the comfortable shorthand of history, not the wedding, not the crown placed on her dark hair, not even the moment Lazar took her bare wrist in his hand in front of the whole court and pressed his mouth, once to the faded pink marks the chains had left there, a silence more devastating than any vow. The image they tell is smaller than that. It is this: a year after the trial, on the anniversary of it, Sigrid sat alone in the scribery long after dark, copying nothing in particular, simply because the candlelight there had once meant something to her, and she liked, sometimes, to sit inside old meanings. And Lazar came in for a letter he did not need, and stood in the doorway exactly as long as he always had. That same half-second hesitation, unchanged by crown or marriage or a year of certainty, before he said, low, "Don't strain your eyes, Your Majesty," using her own title now instead of the old word, clerk, and she looked up at him the way she had looked up at him once before, chained, accused, certain she was about to lose everything. This time, she was certain of nothing except that she would not look away. That was the whole of it. That was what they tell. Not the verdict reversed, not the advisor exiled, not even the wedding. Only a woman lifting her eyes to a king for the second time in her life, freely now, wanted now, and the quiet, complete way the silence between them finally, had nothing left to prove.